All right. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, so I want to welcome everybody to Chicken Keeping 101. This class was designed as a resource for small farmers and homesteaders in our area. And it's really designed as a stepping off point for people. It's in no way exhaustive or, comprehensive. I really just wanted it to be a resource for people who are getting into raising chickens, who maybe folks haven't done it before, or they have chickens, but they're looking for ways to improve their systems and practices. And a lot of these topics that we're going to cover today, they could be their own standalone classes, just like with most subjects, there's so much depth to it. And you can really dive in and learn a lot more. So I want you to know that at the end of the class, I'll be providing a resource list. So if I mention like permits or licenses, if I mention, a couple different kinds of hatcheries, all of those things are going to be in a resource list along with everything I've used to glean information to share with you from books and websites and things like that. So yeah, that will be emailed out to you at the end of the class as well as posted online. And then just my hope for this class is that you're going to leave with more confidence to properly care for your chickens and more confidence in marketing your chicken products, be it eggs or meat, and then have more resources to further your education when it comes to chickens. So I'm Claire Menard. Nice to meet all of you. I work for Washington State University, the Kitsap Extension Office, and also with the Regional Small Farms. And I'm the new and beginning farmer education coordinator, which is why I'm putting on this class. And my own farming background, I was a farmer for 6 years. I worked as an intern, a farm worker, and also a farm manager. And then my background with chickens is every farm I worked on had chickens, and that was like small flocks, anywhere from 20 to 60 birds, to operations with over 100 chickens and ducks. And so yeah, I got a lot of chicken time over the past few years. And then I wanted to introduce the wonderful Lisa Vanhorn. Here she is. Yeah, Lisa, do you want to tell folks about yourself?
Well, I appreciate that, Claire. I was fortunate enough to be asked to sit in today, and I just hope I can maybe provide a little bit of information. I think between the two of us, hopefully we can answer any questions that people may have. I've been breeding heritage line poultry for probably about 15 years and keeping poultry for more years than I want to admit, since I was in college. And with another group of local breeders, we've been running a group called Peninsula Poultry Breeders for about the last 8 years. We're no longer selling birds this year. We're all getting a little long in the tooth and wanting to do some other things. But I have pretty extensive experience with working within the pasture poultry community, and also particularly with breeding birds, particularly breeding for egg color and breeding for sex linkage in heritage line birds, and really trying to encourage, I think, a lot of small farmers to consider keeping their own flocks or consider breeding some of their own birds to kind of bring a little bit more sustainability. But I also understand the importance of hatchery birds and some of the more hatchery hybrid type birds within the farm business plan as well. So that's a little bit about my background.
Thank you, Lisa. And I forgot to mention, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end of this class. So you'll be able to ask both of us all sorts of questions about chickens. Definitely Lisa has way more years of experience with chickens than I do. And yeah, just a wealth of information. So really glad to have you here. So starting out, you probably know the answer for this because you're already at this class, but I just want to ask, are chickens right for you? And chickens are an essential piece of the ecosystem. I think lots of different livestock animals can fulfill that, but chickens are great at building up the soil. Their manure has a very high amount of nitrogen. And yeah, just excellent for soil management. If they're used in a rotational grazing system, they'll forage what cows and sheep miss. And they'll also eat up parasites that are bad for the sheep and cows, but chickens can eat them. So really good in a rotational grazing system. If they're used in a pastured system and run through fields that are going to have crops or had crops in them, they can mow down weeds. They can even mow down cover crop before it goes to seed. They'll eat snails and slugs and other things that are harmful to your vegetable crops. So within a farming system, they're very beneficial. And not only that, but they can add income and diversify your sales in a farm business. And so I wanted to give you an example of that. If you're selling eggs out of a farm stand, you're going to have neighbors and other customers come to your farm stand just for those eggs because everybody loves pastured eggs, like they're delicious, right? And likely when they go in there to buy those eggs, they're going to buy veggies and fruits and other products. And the same goes for at like the farmer's market, for instance. If you're selling eggs there, especially in the springtime, when you don't have a whole lot of other produce to offer, likely you have just mostly brassicas, kale, broccoli, that kind of stuff. If you have eggs, it's just something different to sell. And also it's going to bring farmers market customers to your farmers market booth. And then also I had to put in there, you get to develop a kinship with an animal. I'm a big animal lover. I always love taking care of chickens. And I think they're just such a great addition to the farming business, just to the environment. Yeah. And then what's difficult about keeping chickens is, they require daily feeding and watering. If you have them in chicken tractors, they need to be moved every day. So that takes quite a bit of time. If they're in permanent coops with like a run, they need to be let out and then put back inside every night. Um, so yeah, they're labor intensive. And then also there's the fact that feed is expensive. Those prices are always going up. So that's another consideration. And then also there is predator pressure. They can get eaten by coyotes or raccoons. And being animals, they're susceptible to injury or disease. And a lot of that is preventable, but sometimes it isn't. And that's just a reality of raising animals, is that you're going to lose some of them. And then, so this is something to always keep in mind. What's your poultry purpose? And it's just important to identify what you hope to accomplish by having chickens. And everyone's answer is going to be different. Are you getting them to produce eggs and meat? Is it mainly for income? Are you getting chickens to breed them? Are they going to be pets? Are you getting chickens because you're an animal lover? Are you getting chickens mainly for soil management? And you might answer more than one of those. But then going off of that, how can you integrate chickens into your farm business? How will you market their products, their eggs, their meat? How will you manage the labor it takes to raise those chickens? And how will they be moved around your farm, like physically? Um, and then I should note that it is really difficult to run a commercial chicken business at like a commercial scale where your farm business, the center of it is eggs or meat. Just because the profit margins are slim and feed is so expensive. But the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association is a really great resource for learning how to go about that and be commercially successful with raising chickens. So next we're just gonna kind of get into the nitty gritty of raising chicks from when they're itty bitty babies to adults. So choosing chicken breeds, this can be really fun or really daunting. And if you're just starting out, if you don't have any experience with chickens, try different breeds. And from that, you're going to figure out what works for you. Like, what do you like about the breeds? If you get a few different ones, you can figure out which ones you like best. What your farm, what works best on your farm. And it's going to come down to also what your priority is. Not only with productivity, but just like eggs, meat, dual purpose. There's different breeds for all of that. And then I'm going to pass this off to Lisa because, yeah, she knows a lot about raising chicks and about sourcing chicks.
I think most people, when they start sourcing their birds for the first time in particular, are going to use hatcheries. Hatcheries themselves focus primarily on egg production for most of the breeds that you would buy. So if you wanted to get like a sort of an assortment of different breeds to try out, really common ones that they will have available are things called like production reds or buff Orpingtons or barred rocks. And those birds in the hatchery vein tend to all be an egg first breed. And so that's what hatcheries are primarily going to focus on. They also, for meat birds, though, are also going to be the source that you will get if you're going to raise like a Cornish cross or a Red Ranger or some sort of a hybrid meat bird, because those are not going to be available through any sort of local breeders. What we call standard bred birds or heritage birds are going to be birds that you actually buy from an individual who is breeding them. I will say that hatcheries will have some of the same breeds, but they may be a very different bird. And what I mean by that is the bird that I breed and have for many years is a barred rock. It's a heritage line barred rock. And my roosters are about 10 pounds. My hens are about 8 pounds. They're a dual purpose bird, and the males make a very nice 4-pound carcass at about 16 to 18 weeks. If you bought that same bird from a hatchery, if you went and bought barred rocks from a hatchery, you would get a very different bird. And I have seen people that wanting to get a dual purpose bird will get hatchery breeds and then not be happy with the production of meat from those birds. So just be aware that hatcheries and what are called standard bred birds are birds that are being bred to this standard that's set up by the American Poultry Association or the breed club with the bird. It's just different sources for your birds, but you will get very different birds that way. I would say that I would think with most folks that you're going to start with hatchery birds. The other thing is if you are looking primarily for something like egg production, then you are most likely going to want to go with a hatchery version of maybe a heritage layer. The names that you'll hear are things like Novagens or Isa Browns. These are the hybrid layers that the hatcheries develop. And there's absolutely no way that a standard bred bird is ever going to compete with those birds in numbers of eggs. The trade-off is going to be that those birds have a little less robust genetics. They're not going to be quite as healthy of a bird. They're not going to lay as long. So you're going to have a rotation cycle if you want to keep eggs going of normally about an 18-month replacement schedule. Whereas with a heritage line bird, we breed our birds to, our goal is 3 to 5 years production of eggs from a bird. They tend to be a more healthy bird. My birds are out no matter what the weather is. They're digging up the gardens. They're kind of doing all their work. It's just an option, though, of, kind of being able to source a bird that fits your needs, but do be aware that they will come from different sources. Straight run versus sexed. Hatcheries will offer sexed pullets if you're looking to just get females for eggs. It's usually about a 90% accuracy. So you will still get some cockerels. And they're able to do that by doing something that's called vent sexing. So they have highly trained people, believe me or not, they pay these people a lot of money because it's a hard thing to do. And they actually, sit on a production line and look at the vents of all these little day-old chicks and sex them. It's not something that you would be able to get birds that were not from a hatchery that were sexed that way. So most breeders will sell birds either straight run unless they're doing a sex-link cross, which is something where you breed two birds and you just are able to sex them at hatch through one generation. But in general, if you're buying from a hatchery, you can buy sexed birds. And that's, I think, a big advantage for folks, particularly who are focusing on egg production. But straight one would be something that if you want both males and females, if you're interested in doing your own breeding, if you want cockerels to put in the freezer for your family even, it's a good idea, I think, to try straight run just to see what it's like to sort of raise your own male birds if you've never done that before, if you do eat chicken. So
All right.
did that get that slide, Claire?
Oh yeah, good job. Thank you. All right. So when you get your chicks, you're going to want to brood them, and that means they need to be under heat until they're feathered out. And here you'll see all sorts of examples of different enclosures for your chicks. The important part is keeping them safe from predators, mainly rats and cats and whatnot, but rats love baby chicks. And then you'll want to have feeders and waters that are appropriate for their size. And oh, and also litter is a consideration. There's lots of sources on the internet for what kind of litter you can use. You can use paper towels, which is a really good way of being able to monitor their manure and everything and make sure that they're healthy. And you could also use wood shavings, just make sure they're not cedar wood shavings. And here we have different examples of heat sources for your chicks. So here's a brooder plate. As you can see, it's a heat source and it mimics the mama hen's belly. And so they can kind of hide under it and keep warm. And it's really energy efficient. It's very safe. It's not going to start any fires. And it can be raised up as they grow. Yeah, and also it gives birds the dark cycle that they need, which they're not going to get from a heat lamp, which is on 24/7. And then the sweeter heater is just kind of like another example of it's somewhat similar to the brooder plate. It can be hung up from above. They also have models that tuck against the wall. And then on the bottom here is an Ohio brooder, and this is like a pretty economical DIY brooder, and it uses heat lamps, but with the large version dimensions that I saw, you can brood up to 300 chicks. So it's really good if you're raising meat birds especially, or just a large amount of chickens at once. And then if you are going to use a heat lamp, heat lamps are really economical. Every farm I've worked at has used heat lamps, but they are really dangerous. So just make sure you're using a heavy duty porcelain socket if you are going to use one. Make sure it has a guard, so if it does fall, the light bulb won't be just sitting on a flammable surface. And really don't use a clamp when you're hanging them. I've always used a clamp, but it's a bad idea. Use a loop instead. We're just trying not to start any fires here. So, and you're also trying to keep your chicks safe. All right, so keeping chicks safe and healthy. Their feed, you're going to put them on a chick starter for the first 8 weeks, and that's at 20% protein. Also, make sure to give them free choice chick grit. Chickens don't have teeth, so the grit is how they break up food and they can properly digest everything that they're ingesting. And then this chick here, as you can see, it has a really small water, and that's really important. The water is very shallow in these, and that keeps the chicks safe from drowning. You don't want that to happen. They're so cute. And then care for pullets. So when can pullets be moved to like an outdoor coop? And that really depends on a number of factors, but you want to make sure that they're fully feathered out. Chickens, their feathers, that's how they regulate their body heat and keep warm no matter what the weather conditions are. Um, so you're going to want to move them at some point though from their really small brooder into a bigger enclosure until like putting them out in say like an outdoor coop such as a chicken tractor. Um, and you'll notice them stop using the heat lamp and they'll have all their feathers, and that's a good indication that they're ready to go outside. And then their feed from 8 weeks to 18 weeks old, you'll want to give them grower feed, and that's at 16 to 18% protein. And then also make sure they're not getting oyster shells until they begin laying, because you don't want them laying too early. And then the types of enclosures, you got a lot of options, but we'll go through some of the more popular ones. So this one, everyone's going to be familiar with it. This is a permanent coop. And as you can see, the ground here is pretty bare. So with permanent coops, really it's like a high investment infrastructure. You're going to invest a lot of money up front, but it's lower labor, and that's because you're not moving it every day. Some of the downsides is that yeah, you have bare soil, it gets overgrazed really quickly, and so you have to manage it with litter to make sure that you're not making a good environment for parasites to grow and yeah, for your chickens to get worms. So you'll want to put litter down in that environment. And then yeah, they just don't have access to fresh vegetation. I'd say that's the one drawback of permanent coops. And then here we have chicken tractors, and these are very low investment. I've seen them designed in all sorts of ways. Oftentimes you can make them from scraps found around your property, around your farm. And what they are, they're enclosures, and these move, and usually they move every single day. And this ensures that the chicken gets fresh forage every day, and because they're so narrow, they can be run down rows of crops that are done being harvested, or they can go through fields of cover crop or bare fields before they are planted. Um, yeah, I'd say the drawback of chicken tractors is that sometimes they're so small that it can be stressful for the chickens, especially if they don't have enough food to forage, and they just kind of become bored, and that can create behavior problems such as pecking. They can start eating eggs. We don't want bored chickens because that's when behavior problems start. And here's just an example of a larger chicken tractor. So there's a lot more room here. You can fit a lot more chickens in here, but one this size can't be moved just by one person. It needs either a tractor or a truck to move it through the field. And then this here is a free range enclosure. So again, this coop it would definitely need to be moved with a tractor or a truck. But it has this opening here and that allows the chickens to be let out in the morning and then they're free to forage. You can't see it in this picture, but there'd be an electric fence around this enclosure. And that keeps the chickens in, and as long as it's a really well-maintained electric fence, it's going to be like electric netting. As long as that's well maintained, it's going to keep out raccoons, coyotes, neighborhood dogs. Um, I really like this type of enclosure, but it does leave your chickens susceptible to predator pressure from birds of prey, especially eagles. So it depends on where you're located and what kind of eagle population you have around. It can be a big problem in certain areas. But I like that the chickens are free to forage. It keeps them from getting bored and they can cover a large space and graze it over a period of time. Oh, and just as a side note, I've also found that even with the fully enclosed chicken tractors, that electric netting is still necessary. So there's that to keep in mind. And then Lisa, did you have something to add? No, okay. Thought I saw you wave your hand. Okay, so other coop considerations. You only need one nesting box per 3 to 4 hens. They don't need their own individual box. Um, let's see, room to roost, make sure they have plenty of room, 8 to 10 inches of space. And then again, just always make sure you're keeping your coops as predator proof as possible. It can become a huge issue, especially once a raccoon, gets a taste of chicken and or a coyote, and then it's really hard to get them to stop. So prevention is always the best practice. Which enclosure is right for your farm? The answer to that is going to depend on a number of factors. What's your budget? If you're a small farm starting out, your capital is going to be pretty tight. And so a chicken tractor might be a good option for you. You can make them pretty rudimentary, might not last as long, but then you can build up your infrastructure as you have more capital to spare. And so that's like a low investment. A high investment can look anything like um I've seen setups that have they open up the coops when it's at dawn and they close them down when the chickens have all come into roost and it's all automatic. So that's a bit more expensive, but it's going to save you on labor and it's going to give you more freedom on your farm. Um and then it also depends on space. Do you have, like, how big is your property? Do you have enough property to support pastured chickens? If not, a permanent coop might be a better option for you. And then time, what setup works best with your schedule and with your business schedule? It might be a huge burden for you to be home twice a day to let your chickens out and put them back in. And so maybe chicken tractors are better because you only have to deal with them once a day. Um, and then also just what works best for your business, what kind of labor needs do you have? And yeah, what enclosure best accommodates those needs. So I'd say feed is one of those huge subjects that we could have uh, our own class about. So this is really just the bare minimum introduction to what kind of feed is available for your chickens. Um, how and what you feed your chickens is very important for chicken health and for your business as far as your budgeting goes, because feed is the number one most expensive part about raising chickens. And yeah, so starting out, what do your adult chickens need? There's different chicken food for layers, for broilers, and for breeding chickens. And then there's different types of grind and different coarseness to the feed. So mash is a coarsely ground feed. They're still going to be able to recognize what the different grains are and pick out what they want. So they kind of like cherry pick, which is annoying. And then we have pelleted feed, which is compressed mash. And the drawback of pelleted, okay, the pro of pelleted is that they aren't able to cherry pick. It's all encompassed in one pellet, but they eat it really quickly, but there isn't as much food waste. And then crushed is, it's crushed up pelleted feed. And so it takes them longer to eat, but they're going to waste more of it. And the reason why you want your chicken to spend more time eating is so that they don't become bored, because animals in the wild, like, they spend the majority of their time eating. And so we want to mimic that with our chickens. We want them to spend a lot of time eating, especially if they don't have as much space to forage. Um, and then oyster shells, if you have laying chickens, you're going to want to give them oyster shells once they start laying. And this is going to ensure that they get adequate calcium for strong shells. And granite grit is something you want to give all your chickens. And again, just like with the chicks, they don't have teeth. So the grit is going to ensure that they're able to adequately digest their food. And this is the best way to increase the bioavailability of their feed, because they're able to digest more of it. And a lot of people think pastured birds can get enough grit just from like digging in the ground and picking up little rocks and stuff, but that isn't the case. Especially granite is a really hard rock. So that's the best grit you can give your chicken. And then let's see, a lot of people ferment feed, and this is something I've always done on farms. And some places, even the Scratch and Peck website, will say that it increases the bioavailability of feed, but I haven't been able to find like scientific papers backing that up, so I'm not sure. But there are reasons I like it, and I think it cuts down on feed waste a lot, especially like if you feed your chickens dry feed, you'll notice there's a lot of dust and stuff that they leave behind. When you ferment the feed, it all becomes like this sticky paste, and they'll just eat all of it. So yeah, there's less feed waste. And then yeah, for when you're buying feed, you can buy it bulk or you can buy it bagged. It's good to note that feed is best within 30 days of being processed. And then as it ages and oxidizes, it goes down drastically in nutritional value. Um, so it's best to buy a few bags at a time, or you can buy it in bulk and split it up with local farmers. Um, and also feed can become a huge rodent problem. I've been on farms where rats were just out of control, and it's all because of the feed. So it's really good to invest in some, even just some trash cans to store the feed in, so you don't create a rat problem. And then Lisa, did you have anything to add as far as feeding goes?
I think one thing I would add is I see a lot of folks complaining about their birds wasting feed because they'll bill through the feed. And I've really found that if you have hanging feeders and you hang them at the height of the bird's back, then you will have a lot less problem with them billing out food and sorting through their food. The other thing that I do for our birds is ration food. So I feed, it depends on your breed and your birds, but in general, if you feed 1 ounce of food per pound of body weight per day for birds, then you get less waste problems because they don't kind of pick through it as much. They'll eat everything. I do feed a mash. And I think if they ration it, they don't get as fat. You don't waste feed as much, and they tend to clean it up. Because you don't want to put more feed in on top of old feed. So you want them to clean up all but about 5% of it before you give them more food. And that normally, if I'm doing it on a daily basis, I can just feed them once a day. The other thing I found with mash is if you even just, talking about fermenting it, but if you even just wet it.
Yeah.
So when you wet it, that gets it all to stick together, gets those fines mixed in. They can clean it up that way. Sometimes fermenting for some folks is a lot of work because you have to have the buckets and they can sit for a certain period of time, but not too long. But some folks have kind of found that if they even just wet it and feed it that day, that can be a way as well to help with the mash feed. So that's what I would mention.
Okay, that's good advice with the wetting the feed. I like that. Um, so these are examples of different kinds of feeders, and there's a lot of information for feeders on the internet. The biggest picture here is like a gutter feeder, and then on the bottom we have a PVC pipe feeder, and the top is a more traditional, just kind of more bucket feeder. And like Lisa said, chickens are like notorious feed wasters. They love to bill out, and they love to spill feed everywhere and then not eat it. So yeah. I'll in the resource list that I send out, there's actually designed for a hanging feeder, a gutter feeder that hangs from the rafters of a chicken tractor. And I just think that's genius because that way you don't have to take the feed out every time you move the tractor. Another thing to note is that an ideal feeder prevents roosting. And another thing is that you should make sure that the chickens have all of them enough space to eat. That way the lowest on the pecking order also feeds. And that's another reason why these long, narrow feeders are really ideal because it ensures that all the chickens have plenty of space and they'll all get adequate feed. And feed amounts, it really depends on a lot of factors. Comes down to breed, where you're located, the time of year and the temperature, what the bird is used for. Overeating in chickens can cause a lot of health problems, and they carry their weight differently than other animals. It's all internal, like it's pretty hard to see, and it will wrap around their organs, including their liver, and can cause, anyways, a lot of health problems. And when you're overfeeding your birds, it's not only unhealthy for them, but like Lisa said, it just wastes feed. And when feed is the most expensive thing, it's good to, yeah, to restrict their feed and make sure that they're getting enough and not too much. So these are very general numbers here, but layers eat on average a quarter pound of feed each day. And meat birds' lifetime consumption will be 22.5 pounds or more. That number is just for Cornish crosses, and it's a pretty low number if you look at other breeds of meat birds and what their feed needs will be. Water is just as important as feed when it comes to egg quality, laying quality, ability to lay. When it comes to eating for meat birds and putting on weight, water is very important. So you can start out by always making sure they have fresh, clean water and making sure it's clear of biofilm. And that just means that it's odorless and colorless. It's not going to be like this deep green color. Birds are not going to want to drink as much water when it doesn't taste good. And a good thing to know is to pay attention to water consumption. Non-layers will drink 1 to 2 cups of water a day. Layers are going to drink 2 to 4 cups and even more if it's hot out. There's lots of different types of waters out there. These right here are nipples, and these are cups, and these are great for keeping water clean because the water source isn't something that the chickens can access. But something to keep in mind is that you should have two separate ones, completely separate, so that if one of these malfunctions, the other one will still work. And you have to make sure all the time that they're functioning properly, make sure they're not clogged, and that the chickens are getting water. And also make sure that the chickens understand how to use them. I always worked at places that would give water with buckets, and those were really easy, except when it came time to like lift them out of the chicken tractor. And also they had to be scrubbed all the time because they got dirty really quickly. Integrating chickens onto your farm, fences are going to be your friend, especially, when you have veggie fields. This is a really idyllic photo here, but you don't want your chickens anywhere near the rhubarb that you're going to be selling at the market. That's like a big no-no, right? So food safety laws say that you need to, raw manure can't be applied to a field less than 120 days before harvest. So the same goes for having chickens in any crop field, including in chicken tractors. If your chickens are run in a tractor through a field, you have to wait 120 days before you're harvesting the next crop that you're going to plant in there. And then also using best practices when it comes to cross contamination. Make sure that your hands, also your clothes, your shoes are clean. Make sure you're washing eggs and dealing with feeding equipment and all that, just in areas that are separated from where you're processing veggies. All right, so marketing eggs. Like I said, people love farm eggs. They're really delicious. So if you're selling eggs on your farm, and that means from your farm stand, from CSA customers that are picking up on your farm, or from people that are coming onto your farm, no permit is required. So you don't have to get any sort of licensing or permitting, and you can use old egg cartons and also cartons from like grocery stores or other farms, as long as they're clean. If you're selling eggs off the farm, you need to acquire your Washington State egg handler and dealer license. And your egg cartons also need egg seals, which maybe some of you have seen them before. It's a little green sticker. And you just put them on each individual egg carton. And both these things can be obtained through the WSDA food safety program. Also, if you're selling eggs off farm, the cartons need to be brand new. They can't be recycled cartons. And then if you're slaughtering your meat birds, you're going to need two different permits unless the meat birds are just for your family's consumption. So depending on how you're selling those birds, you'll either need your special poultry permit or your food processing license. The special poultry permit is for direct to consumer. So from your farm to the consumer, they're going to come and pick up the bird from you, and you're just selling the whole bird. And the infrastructure for that permit is pretty rudimentary. It can be as simple as a tent with a hand washing station. So it's a bit less investment in infrastructure. The birds do have to be sold within 48 hours of slaughter. And then the WSDA food processing license, that's if you want to market your meat birds, say at a farmer's market, or if you want to sell your chicken, like chicken breast or chicken wings, if you want your chicken parceled out. And that license, it does require that you have a dedicated room to processing your birds. And then culling of old birds, I thought this was important to include. because on the farms where I've worked, it's just a reality of raising chickens there. So whether you decide to cull your older birds or not is really up to you, and it depends on how they're integrated into your farm. You know, older birds can still be a benefit to your farming system. They can still help manage the soil health of the farm. And I know a lot of people who have chickens who, you know, they're both livestock and a pet. Their kids are attached to them or they're attached to them. And just when it comes down to a farm business, you have to weigh the cost of care versus the benefit to the farm. And that benefit could be purely emotional, totally fine, but it's just something to keep in mind. How, if you're acquiring chickens, how are you going to manage them as they grow older, as they stop laying as much, and as they you know, they're not laying as much, they're not bringing in income, and you're feeding them. So how do you want to manage that as a farm business? And then the equipment that's needed, it's not a huge setup, but it is really helpful to have cones, a scalder, and a chicken plucker. And I've included in our resource list, I know of only one farm in the area that rents out that equipment, but I'm hoping in the future, Clallam and Jefferson County also have options for renting that equipment, because I think it's just beneficial for a lot of these small farms with big flocks of egg layers to have that ability to cull their older birds and be able um, to benefit from them and to eat them and whatnot. Winter care. So in our area of Western Washington, our birds are pretty lucky. Our winters are very mild. So the advice I'm giving is really just for those times, and especially the last couple of years, we've had some pretty brutal cold snaps. So this advice is for them then when the temperatures aren't going above freezing during the daytime hours. So you want to make sure that your birds are drinking enough water. If you give them warm water, it can lead to more water consumption, which is what we want for egg development and just for their health. Make sure you're not using heat lamps. I've never even had to bring birds indoors or into a more a coop that wasn't outdoors, even during the really cold nights, you know, when it got down to 9 degrees, the single digits. Heat lamps and flying birds is just a recipe for disaster. It can risk starting a fire, so really not necessary. Birds have a lot of thick feathers and they can huddle together and keep each other really warm that way. And just water is the biggest concern. You might need to use different waters that don't freeze as much as, like, say, the nipple waters or the water cups. You might need to use like a bucket or something. And then if you have a heated garage or a mud room, it's a really nice practice to have a couple of waters brought in. They can thaw and you switch them out with ones that are already thawed and just kind of dance them around until the days get above freezing again. And then summer care, again, we're having more heat waves during the summer. And if you like it, chances are your bird likes it too. So provide as much shade as possible, provide cool, fresh water. If the water's too warm in the summertime, the birds aren't going to drink as much. So I even read somewhere that someone froze buckets of ice into big ice blocks, and they were putting those in their birds' water to just keep it cool. And know the signs of heat stress. Birds are going to pant, they'll droop, they'll fan out their feathers. And that's just all a way of, you know, chickens, they can't sweat. So when they're doing those things, they're trying to regulate their body temperature. And also air ventilation is really key. And then molting and broodiness are two aspects of their natural cycles for hens that can affect their egg laying. The molt usually occurs in the fall, and it's the birds are trying to replace old feathers with new ones, thicker ones that are going to keep them warm in the winter time. Nutrients that would usually go to eggs go towards producing new feathers. So sometimes the egg laying ceases or just decreases with the molt. Some people feed animal protein during this time. What that does is animal protein has more amino acids in respect to grain. And so that's going to help them produce those feathers faster and get back to a normal laying cycle. The process length can vary. And then if you have productive layers, more hybrid, high productivity laying hens, it's going to be a year or more before they molt. And so their appearance is going to start looking pretty ragged. And that's how you know they're productive layers. And then broodiness is a hen's instinct to hatch eggs. And it's usually triggered by lengthening days, so around this time of year. The signs of it is she'll stop eating and drinking as much. She just wants to set on eggs all day long. When you go to the nesting box to collect eggs, she's going to puff up. She might growl. She might peck when you go in there to grab the eggs, which is always really scary. Yeah, and she'll stop laying during this time. She's not eating or drinking as much. And broodiness you can break it out by, there's a couple ways. You can avoid letting eggs accumulate. You can repeatedly move the hen from her nest, take her off of it over and over. And you can also put her in a broody pen, and this will have a wire floor. And what that does is the cool air, the airflow will cool off her underbelly, and that can help disrupt the hormones that are triggering the broodiness. And usually it only takes 1 to 3 days for this to happen, to break it up. Like hopefully it only takes 1 to 3 days, and she should start acting normally, eating, drinking, foraging, and she can go back in with the other hens. So troubleshooting chicken problems. Yeah, there's a lot of ways that chickens can become sick, get injured, act funny, stop laying. And so, yeah, there's ways to troubleshoot these problems. And it usually comes down to husbandry, so how you're keeping the chicken. And sometimes it comes down to genetics as well. So I have some examples. If they've stopped laying in the middle of the summer, has there been a heat wave recently, or has there been predator pressure? If their eggshells are suddenly thin, are they receiving enough oyster shells? Or is it a problem with their feed? Has their feed changed? If they're prolapsing, are they a hybrid breed that's prone to this reproductive issue? In which case that could be related to genetics. Or it could again be something with their feed. If they have issues with mites or lice, do they have access to a dust bath, to a place where they can take dust baths? Because dust bathing is really critical for chicken health and for their comfort and happiness. So it's good to diagnose the problem so you can prevent it from happening in the future. One thing to note, if the chicken has any sort of bleeding, they need to be isolated, because chickens are pretty cannibalistic. If they see even a little bit of blood, they're going to start pecking, and sometimes they peck that chicken to death, and it's really gruesome. Also, if the chicken isn't eating or drinking, or the other chickens aren't allowing them to eat and drink, they again need to be isolated until they can do that with other chickens around. And usually I would just put them in like a little cat carrier, or you can put them in their own enclosure. So unfortunately, most vets aren't going to work on chickens. It's not worth their time, and it's really expensive. So it's really difficult to find a vet that's even willing to come take a look at your chicken. The best option is to consult with other farmers, other homesteaders, other chicken owners. They've encountered chicken health problems themselves, and they're going to be able to help you out. And the internet helps too, but I like to be able to connect with people and share knowledge that way. So I just want to go back to the importance of proper care. Our goal as chicken keepers is always low stress and strong immune system. That's going to give you the healthiest chicken possible. The way chickens are kept is linked to their health. And I really believe that the proper care of chickens has a twofold benefit. One, it's humane. It's the right way to treat them, but also it ensures that they continue to thrive as layers or as meat birds, and that's going to always benefit your farm business. If you think about how much labor and money you put into a chick until, say, they're a hen and they begin laying, or until they're a meat bird ready for slaughter, they're an investment that deserves to be treated with care. And so I'm going to pass it off to Lisa. She made these two lists. It's the 5 most common mistakes that people make when keeping chickens, and then 5 ways to keep your chickens happy.
I think like Claire mentioned, it really comes down to husbandry issues. And I think for new chicken keepers, a lot of it is just not quite understanding yet what their needs are of the animal, the biology of the animal. I think one of the biggest problems that people have is having too small of a space for their birds, because that results in a lot of, I mean, you're talking about stress and immune system issues. It can affect both of those. And a lot of the behavioral issues that you'll see, the feather pecking, the peck outs, the being bullying each other, giving each other an injury, and then that leads to their blood loss, and then they get the whole, ganging up on everybody, has to do with space. The minimum space that birds should have is 10 square feet per bird. And again, that's minimum. And I think if you are keeping them in a tractor and then you can move them every day so that they are getting new ground, as Claire mentioned earlier, that keeps them busy with feeding and grazing, and they're not picking on each other. A lot of the small coops that you'll see sold, like through even at feed stores or online, they're these very tiny little things, and they'll have some ridiculously large number of birds that supposedly can be kept in them. And in the vast majority of those, you would not even want to put 1 or 2 chickens. So coming up with something, whether it's doing a chicken tractor or, some people, even if they're going to have a standard coop, will go buy one of the sheds that you can buy at like Home Depot or something like that and make it into a chicken coop, something to give your birds a lot more space. So that's one thing to think of, is how much space you're able to give them. Number 2, which is ventilation, any kind of housing that your birds have should have good ventilation. And this becomes incredibly important around here in the wintertime when we have a lot of rain and there's a lot of moisture. Birds have a very sophisticated respiratory system. They have air sacs that are actually throughout their body. So they have, when they breathe in, it doesn't just go into their lungs, it goes throughout their body. And so when they get a respiratory infection, it's a big deal to a chicken. It's actually probably one of the most dangerous infections for them to get. And so the best way to avoid that is to make sure that you've got good ventilation in whatever type of housing that you have, but not drafty, because they're wearing those down feather coats to keep them warm. So you don't want drafts that are actually blowing air onto them, but you do need to have ventilation. And what goes along with your good ventilation is proper sanitation, and that means manure management. So you need a way to manage your manure, because when they, their manure is very moist. And if it's an enclosed environment, if you're not cleaning it often, you're going to get very high humidity levels, and you're going to get a lot of ammonia. And that's going to have an impact again on their respiratory system. It's going to also impact egg production because it's going to be putting stress on the birds. And so looking at what type of manure management plan, whether you've got dropping boards under your roosts that can be scraped off every couple of days. I use big sand pits under my roosts. And I put like a PDZ or a stall dry that I mix in with sand so that it actually desiccates the droppings. And then I have roosts that lift up, and I just go in with a cat scoop, a big cat scoop, or scoop kind of like you can use it. If you have a big space, you could use a horse manure scraper. But having some way that you're caring for your manure, because if you're just letting it build up in your bedding, then that's going to oftentimes give you a lot more ammonia in your housing situation. That's going to be good for your birds. Nutrition is always an important one. It's always the first one you're going to look at for the thing that people are really tempted to skimp on, or but it really is, I think, something that will lead to health problems. And I think even more importantly to you, it's going to lead to things like lower production. So making sure that you're buying a feed that is able to give your birds what they need. For those people who want to make their own feed, it's very much, I think, worthwhile to become very educated on what's needed for that. And there are some really good sources out there which we can help you find. But I think for people starting off, the best thing to do is to get some actual feed that has been formulated by folks who know how to get the nutrients correct. And then I think number 5, underestimating predators. This will happen to everyone when they're new to chickens. They will lose a bird to a predator because it's hard to know where they all come from, but they all want to eat your chickens. And a lot of people have this sort of mythology of letting their chickens run free, and it might work at first until the predators learn, whether it's a coyote or your neighborhood dogs or an eagle or a hawk. And so being very aware of what predators you have in your area and what you're going to do to protect your birds from them, I think is something that's worth putting some effort into thinking about and talking to other folks about if you're not sure what predators you might have in your area. And then do we have 5 steps, kind of the opposite side of that, giving them a lot of space, indoors and outdoors. I think fresh air is important for birds, getting out, being able to peck around, take a dust bath, eat some greens. That's how you get those really gorgeous orange, deep orange yolks in your eggs, as your birds are actually getting some good beta carotene from vegetation. Getting excellent predator proofing for whatever your situation might be. Claire had mentioned using electric poultry netting, which I will second as probably one of the most effective and also I think cost effective for me. I pasture all my birds. They're in tractors with electric netting. It's very similar to the netting that I use with my sheep as well. Run it off of solar chargers. And I have, knock on wood, not had a predator loss for quite a few years now. So thinking about how you're going to do that and putting some effort into predator proofing, both at night and during the day. Complete nutrition for their life stage of your birds. As we mentioned, nutrition is important. Being prepared for that dark and damp time of year with your ventilation, your manure management. The other thing that often happens in the wintertime is parasites. Claire had mentioned the importance of dust bathing in the wintertime when it's raining outside. You want to make sure that your birds have some sort of covered or indoor dust bathing opportunity so that they can dust bathe all year long to keep those mites. Mites and lice are the main things that they will pick up from wild birds. If they're dust bathing, they're able to pretty much manage those in most cases on their own. Anytime that you get parasites on your birds, again, you should be looking at your husbandry because it's going to tie back directly to that. I have never had to worm a bird. And I think if you're good at keeping your birds, you won't have to as well. And the last one I will say is, I think, very important right now with the increased risk from avian influenza. And that is to practice good biosecurity. And there's a lot of good information on the internet from the USDA on basic biosecurity for backyard flocks, particularly in respect to avian influenza. We have had a number of cases here in Jefferson County. I live on Marrowstone Island. We lost 1,700 Caspian terns last year on Marrowstone Island to avian influenza, 5 harbor seals. So I am like ramped up on my biosecurity. I still let my birds outdoors. But I think it's really important for anyone who's keeping poultry to be educated at this point in time about the basic biosecurity that they need to look at for not only avian influenza, but any other type of pathogen that you can bring into your birds. So those are kind of the main, I think, quick things to think about.
And I want to add, going back to biosecurity, I worked on a farm that had chickens with Marek's disease, and it's just a disease that chickens can get. It's pretty brutal. It can kill them, and I think these ones got it from wild birds, but it lives on the dander, and so when I go to that farm, I have to be careful if I'm, when I used to work on other farms, I had to wash all my clothes, my boots, to make sure I wasn't taking dander that I could have picked up from those chickens and brought home to the chickens where I worked. So that's another part of biosecurity. If you're visiting other farms with chickens, make sure you're going in with clean clothing, clean shoes, and make sure that when you go back to your chickens, everything is clean again, because you don't want to be passing any diseases to another farm or picking any up and bringing it back home. So, like I said, there's going to be a resource guide that I'll be sending out, and it's going to have a wealth of information on there. But most of the information that I used in this presentation comes from these 3 books, especially the 2 by Gail Damarov. Yeah, she just has some really good big books with lots of information, and especially the Chicken Health Handbook. I think it's something that every poultry keeper should have a copy of. All right, and so that concludes our presentation. I am going to take my screen off sharing. Yeah, and I wanted to open it up to questions if folks can either raise their actual hand, or you can go to react. There's let's see, there should be a way for you to wave your hand under reactions, and or if you're not comfortable with that, you can throw it in our chat as well. All right, it looks like Elisa, did I pronounce that right? Looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I have 3 questions. Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay, so actually, no, 4. One thing, when you get your chicks, they're quite small and you need electrolytes, especially in the summer, to keep them cool. So should I do that when they're older also, if it's like really warm? You don't need to?
Where'd it go?
Okay. Another one is, why do they have an instinct to go broody?
Can we start with your first question? So Lisa, what are your thoughts on giving electrolytes to chicks and
I don't think it's necessary. I think if you had a lot of shipping stress for chicks that came from a hatchery, then possibly in the very beginning. The problem with electrolytes is they have a lot of salts in them. And I think that can be disadvantageous to the birds. One of the things you can do in the summertime, I think that's maybe a little bit better than if it's very hot, is you can add a little bit of apple cider vinegar to the water. And they actually like the taste of that. It will increase their drinking. So if they're hot and maybe it's harder to keep the water cool, adding a little bit of apple cider vinegar will actually encourage them to drink water, which is what you want them to be doing, is just to have straight water.
Okay, and then also, why do they have an instinct to go broody, and is there a way to prevent that?
So they go broody because that's how they would raise babies naturally. You know, when a bird is like a robin is going to have, you know, she lays a clutch of eggs and then she sits on it. And chickens will do that as well. But what we have developed chickens and bred chickens to be is a bird that continually produces eggs. It is a genetic trait. So there are lines of birds that do not lay eggs, and there are lines of birds that are more prone to going broody. And depending on what you want, because some people want to have broody hens and some don't. It does, if a hen goes broody, it does encourage everybody else to go broody as well, which is one of the reasons I think it's, if you want to keep egg production up, you want to stop that broodiness. But it is usually brought on by temperature, daylight increasing. So this time of year, you'll start to see it. Certain breeds of birds are notorious for it, silkies in particular. People will keep silkies specifically because they go broody constantly and they can raise baby chicks. And then they'll keep a laying breed like a leghorn, which would probably never go broody because it's been almost totally bred out of them to go broody. So it kind of depends on the line of birds as well. And you can find birds that are broody and birds that aren't.
Okay, so going back to the first question about electrolytes, you said don't use electrolytes even if they're chicks unless they've, have some stress.
Yeah, I would say if you don't see a need for doing, it shouldn't be a need for giving electrolytes. The only time I would see doing it is if they are particularly highly stressed, such as what we call shipping stress, if they've come from a hatchery and they've been in transport for a couple of days and sometimes they get overheated. So if they seem stressed, you could add some to there's something called chick booster you could add to their water, but I would only do that for a very limited period of time.
Okay, and so you were talking about sometimes, I guess, the runt of the pack, they will be pecked on, and so I'm thinking if we separate them and then they come back and then they keep pecking, do I just wait until they stop? And then sometimes, is there a case where they're isolated for until they die?
A lot of it depends on the situation. When you're introducing new birds, you always want to introduce more than one bird at a time because a single bird will get picked on. Birds should always be the same size when you put them together. So you don't want little birds and big birds together, or the big birds will always usually peck on the little birds. It might be that your conditions are too crowded. If you have one bird in particular that's a bully, I would pull that bird out and keep it out for a while and then see if that kind of decreases its standing in the flock so that when you put it back in, it's not quite as bossy and bullyish. So it kind of depends on the situation.
Okay, and then last question, what's a good way to keep their immune system strong?
I think to take good care of them. I think, as Claire said, keep them as stress-free as possible. And I think the better your husbandry, the less stress on your birds, the better your nutrition. Probably those two things are going to make the best impact on their immune systems.
All right. So I'm gonna pull some questions that were put in the group chat. So the first one is from KM. I think I'm just seeing initials. And they said, I have heard that giving your chickens some dried herbs can help make their eggs taste better. Is that just an old wives' tale?
I haven't heard that. I know some things can impact the taste. If you feed too much fish meal, you will, or too much flaxseed, you will get kind of a fishy taste in your eggs. But I don't know about herbs.
KM is me, Catherine, so I'm hopping in for that. Because I heard like online for Amazon, people going like, oh, here's different like dried flour mixes and herb mixes that can just make the eggs taste better. So that's also just like it's just fluff on Amazon, right? Like it doesn't actually change it. It's just the fish meal, it sounds like will actually change the flavor.
To my experience, I would say
Okay,
it's somewhat fluff. Yeah.
perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
I've heard in places like Sweden that their eggs sometimes taste like fish because on the chicken farms they'll give their chickens like fish to eat. So
Yeah, because I know like for some pigs, they're like, okay, we'll give them acorns and that can change the taste of the meat for that way. But you know what? Chickens, they're special, unique. They don't fall into that. So wonderful. Thank you.
all right, the next question is how might one store feed longer term for a national disaster scenario, such as when there's supply chain issues, etc., without losing the nutritional value after 30 days? Is there such thing as a chicken who survives in the wild without reliance on feed from human captors? That's an
Sure.
interesting question.
Um, I- yes. I think for mash feed, it's 30 days from basically it's 30 days from the time that you break the grain, when you break the coat of the grain. Pelleted feed in general is a 6-month window because it's actually cooked. And so it has a better or a longer shelf life, either if it's either pellets or crumbles, either case. I think for a longer term, that's where you would be getting into growing your own or making your own feed, because you can keep grains. As long as you have grains and you're not breaking the coat on the grain, you can actually store the grain for a long time, but then you would have to process it in order to use it for feed. So in that case, I think you would need to be skilled and knowledgeable about creating your own feed. And there are certainly people that do that. And certainly there are chickens that, I mean, our domestic chicken was developed from something called an Asian jungle fowl, which still exists. If you look at them, they're kind of the red and black. That's a classic chicken color. They're very tiny. They probably wouldn't be much to eat, and they probably only lay a dozen eggs a year. So if they're making their own feed, that's probably what you're going to see. They're going to not be laying a bunch of eggs, and they're not going to be putting on meat. You know, those are things that we breed for because they're important to us. And so if those are the products that we want, then we do have to provide the nutrition to get the animal there.
All right. The next question is from Brandon. We have been growing our own fodder for years from wheat berries for our girls. The source we have for wheat berries is on the east side of the state in Pluis. Is there any suppliers over here where we could get supplies for doing our fodder?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either. And then this one is, can't scroll up. It's from KK. What are your thoughts on the safety of diatomaceous earth, food grade, spread in the coop to keep it dry? And that's the first question.
Well, one of my pet peeves. I am not a fan of diatomaceous earth in a situation where the birds are going to breathe it in, because they have such sensitive respiratory systems, and diatomaceous earth is the structure of it is very abrasive. So I think there is a risk to the bird's respiratory system with a lot of diatomaceous earth. I know that some people put some in there, a small amount in their dust baths. For keeping the coop dry, I would tend to use something more like lime. There's a type of lime called, is it like Saturday lime or something like that, that a lot of people swear by for keeping coop kind of controlling moisture in a coop. The other thing you can use are some of the mineral products, like PDZ or Stall Dry, that are a desiccating, and they do more to like dry things than diatomaceous earth they don't have kind of the abrasive impact on the bird's respiratory system. That's just my personal, take on it, but I'm sure there are others with different opinions. As in all things poultry, there's lots of opinions.
Yeah, the way I heard the diatomaceous earth described is it's like on its microscopic level, it's like tiny little shards that are meant to pierce the hard outer shell of, like dust mites and everything. And so if you think about the birds breathing that in, it's like cutting up their lungs, and it can just be so bad for them. So the second question from KK is it okay for a rooster to eat layer feed along with the hens if it's not a permanent thing, like one bag?
Yes. The layer feed does have extra calcium in it, but the type of calcium it has is not highly absorbable, which is why we do the oyster shell, because the type of calcium available in oyster shell is a much more bioavailable form for the hens to use for eggshell development. So there is, a risk, I suppose, over a long period of time that a rooster could develop some kidney issues from getting a large amount of extra calcium. I feed my birds, my roosters eat the same feed that my hens eat. And I have old roosters that do just fine. I've never had an issue with it in my birds. So that's just my personal experience.
And then I wanted to go back to Brandon because someone did tell me, it was actually today, about a farmer, I believe in Jefferson County at Egg and I Farm. And this person is mixing feed for different chicken farmers. So that could be an option. If anything, that farmer might know where you can get the wheat berries that you're seeking. So
That's Doyle at he's on Egg and I Road, and he does the grain. Yeah.
is it Egg and I Farm? Is that the name of it?
I can't remember if that's his farm name or if that's the name of the farm next to him.
I think it's the farm name because that's what Kelly told
Okay.
me. So I'm putting it in the chat for you, Brandon. Okay. Let's see. All right. Do we have any other questions from folks? Doesn't look like it. All right. So I am going to see. So at the end of Washington State University classes, we asked that people fill out a survey. So I'm going to put that link in the chat, and I'll be emailing it as well. I just have to find it real quick. Well, I'll be emailing it to everyone. So if you could please fill that out. It's a really crucial part to being able to offer these classes, getting the funding for them. And yeah, so I'll be emailing that along with the resource list of so many of the aspects of this presentation. And yeah, I'm just hoping that we're giving you the right tools to further your education and continue your journey in keeping chickens. All right. And feel free to shoot me an email if you have any other questions. And thanks so much for coming tonight. Bye, everyone.